Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Well, this is Book 5 of the Wolfman Chronicles, Episode 60. In Chapter 9, Homeward Bound. We're in Alaska still. Well, the crackling fire cast flickering shadows across the weathered log walls of Carl's cabin as Sasha wrapped her fingers around a steaming mug of coffee. The borrowed flannel shirt hung loose on her frame, warm and comforting. He had no pants that would fit the slim hips of the woman, so he had given her an old pair of flannel pajama bottoms that his mother had given him for Christmas when he first moved to Alaska many years ago. They were still in their original wrapper, unopened after all these years. He had been a much younger and leaner man back in those early days. He looked at them fondly before handing them over to Sasha. It had been a thoughtful gift, he realized, though, at the time. He had thought them rather silly, covered with images of reindeer prancing through the snow. Now, as far as his mother was concerned, he was leaving his family behind in Colorado to head to the North Pole. Carl leaned forward in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Sasha. Now, miss, I think it's time you explained how you ended up in my trap. It's not every day I find a naked woman in the woods. Sasha took a deep breath, her blue eyes meeting Carl's. Well, it's a long story, but I suppose I owe you an explanation. She paused, considering her words carefully. I'm what you might call a werewolf, though that term doesn't quite capture the truth of it. Carl's eyebrows shot up. He remained silent, waiting for her to continue. It can be a genetic trait passed down through families, Sasha explained, her voice low and measured, although my affliction is from a bite I received not long ago while I was in Russia. It was an old woman who bit me, and at the time, I didn't know that'd give me the ability to transform myself into a wolf. It was several months after I was bitten that I realized I had the curse, if you will. But please, don't be afraid. I don't hunt humans. I don't even hunt animals. It's not at all what the fairy tales or Hollywood makes it out to be. It's actually a quite normal process. We're able to transform into wolves, drawing strength from the wilderness around us. We? Carl asked. There's more like you? Sasha nodded her head. My husband, Jack, is a very good and honest man. He's a protector and he fights for what's right in this world. His sister, her husband, and others. Honestly, I don't know how many there are in other parts of the world, and not all of them are good. As she spoke, Sasha's mind drifted to the moment she first transformed. The rush of power and primal instinct that had coursed through her veins. She shook off the memory, focusing on Carl's reaction. To her surprise, the grizzled old trapper nodded slowly. Well, I've seen strange things in these woods. Your story, it's a crazy one, he sighed. But it's not the craziest thing I've heard. Sasha felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you for believing me. It's not something I share lightly. Carl's expression softened, and he chuckled. Yeah, I don't suppose so. You're likely to end up on the wrong end of a gun around these parts, but I do appreciate your honesty. But tell me, how the hell did you end up running into my traps? Who are you running from? Sasha looked down at her coffee mug, and she took a deep breath. You know what's crazy? I just told you I was a werewolf. And that was the easy part of the story. Carl lifted his eyebrows and got up from his chair. In that case, I better pour us both another cup of coffee. This is a story I want to hear. While Carl was in the kitchen, Sasha thought back over the past year. How much of it should she tell this stranger? She was in his house, at his mercy. She felt she owed him an explanation, at least in part. But just how much was enough? Carl returned and handed her the hot mug. "Thank you. I'm so grateful," Sasha remarked, not knowing where to begin. "Go on, I'm listening," Carl replied. "Well, I am from Russia, as you probably guessed by my accent. I was married to a man there, a very bad man. He was involved in the Russian mafia. I was able to escape from him, but my daughter was taken from me. Now, he is dead now, and my daughter has managed to escape from their clutches, but they are after us. They know we are here, and that is who I was running from." "And where is your new husband?" Carl asked. "Jack? Well, we're not actually married, but we hope to be soon." Sasha gulped back her tears at the thought of Jack. "He is searching for me." Carl eyed her closely. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he said, "There's a lot of holes in your story, Sasha, but I suppose that's to be expected. Tell me where your home is now." "Well, we live just outside a circle, just up the ridge from the river," Sasha replied. Carl, he looked surprised. "Well, they're not much out that way, and you've traveled quite a distance." "Yes," Sasha replied. "I was in Fairbanks doing some shopping with a friend. She was in a salon getting her hair done, and I was waiting outside in a car. Someone abducted me and took me to a farm outside of town. I escaped from there and I ran. I don't know how many miles, until I ended up in your trap." "I see," Carl replied. "And this friend of yours, where's she?" "I'm sure she's looking for me too. I must get back to that house at Circle. There's no way to reach him by phone, and I need to let him know I'm okay. Please, I'm hoping you can help me." She looked at Carl pleadingly, grateful to see compassion in his eyes. "Well, I'd be happy to drive you home. But first, I have a favor to ask." He hesitated, his weathered hands clenching and unclenching. Would you bite me?" Sasha's eyes widened in shock. "What? Why would you want that?" Carl's gaze dropped to the floor. "I've got heart disease. Doc says I don't have long left. Hell, I don't know if I'd even make it through this next winter. If what you say is true, maybe..." Sasha's heart clenched with empathy, but she shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, Carl. It doesn't work that way. Our abilities don't grant eternal life or heal diseases. It's just a different form we take." Carl's shoulders sagged, but he nodded in understanding. "Worth a shot, I suppose. It'd be an interesting way to live out my last years here on the planet." Sasha looked at him in disbelief. "You're a wolf trapper, Carl. You trap and kill wolves. Why would you want to be one?" "I don't know. I guess over the years I've come to an understanding of the creatures. They're fiercely intelligent. When I was a young man, I looked at them as a source of income, a way to survive out in this harsh environment. But now, I don't know, maybe I'm getting soft in my old age." Sasha smiled. "You sound like Grizzly." "Grizzly? You talking Grizzly Adams? That old trapper up there in Circle?" "Well, you know him?" Sasha asked, smiling with disbelief. "That's whose property we're staying on. Well, he's a bit of a character, but he got a sweet side too." "Oh, he's a character, all right. Not many of us old-timers left around here. It'd be good to see him again. He's still got that old mule, Molly." A wave of relief flooded over Sasha. Just knowing that this man knew Grizzly, somehow it made him feel more like family. "Yeah, he still walks into town with Molly trailing behind. Well, I'll be damned, muttered Carl. How do you know him? I thought he kept pretty much to himself. He doesn't like to leave his cabin unless it's to walk to the bar in town, Sasha asked. Well, we've both been trying to earn a living from this harsh country for a lot of years. Grizzly's done a fair bit of trapping. I run into him occasionally when he's selling his furs. There's been a couple of times when I didn't meet my quota for the year. Self-imposed quota, you understand. I run short a couple of times and just about had to call it quits. Old Grizzly bailed me out a few times, but he sure as hell wouldn't want me spreading that around. He likes to keep up appearances, you know. Sasha laughed. It was comfortable talking with Carl, especially now that she knew they had old Grizzly in common. So you're not married? Sasha carefully asked him, trying not to sound as if she was prying. No, thought about it a time or two, but it's a hard life out here in this part of the world. It would take a special kind of woman to put up with the likes of me, Carl replied, quietly staring at the fire. Sasha looked down at her glass. Thank you, Carl, for not shooting me out there, for not shooting me once you found out I was different. You're a good man, but I'm really anxious to get home. I need to let Jack know I'm okay. Understand. Give me a few minutes to get my gear together and we'll get you home, he replied. Miles away, Jack's truck slowly drove past a small clapboard cabin nestled deep in the forest, several miles out of Fairbank. A dark SUV was parked out front. That's the place? Jack asked as he drove past, careful not to alert whoever was parked there. Yes, Nati replied, but I don't know whose vehicle that is. Surely it's one of Vitya's men. Okay then. We need to drive ahead and circle back through the forest. I need to know if Sasha is in there. A short distance up the road, Jack turned off on a dirt logging road that wound through the forest behind the cabin. Finding a safe place to park the truck, Jack and his two passengers got out and prepared to hike back. Nadia's dark eyes scanned the surrounding forest. Her body coiled like a spring ready to unleash. I don't like the feeling I'm getting. I feel like we're being watched. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the distance, causing all three to freeze. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he locked eyes with Natia and Igor. Without a word, he signaled to the two, and they sprinted into the cover of the dense undergrowth. Shh, Nadia whispered. Just ahead of them, they caught a movement, dark against the dark shadows of the trees. Her breath caught in her throat as they watched a moose step out from behind a dense growth of wild rose bushes. It stopped for a moment to munch on the few remaining rose hips. Jack breathed a sigh of relief as the moose glanced their way, then continued searching the bush for the tart berries. We need to be on guard for traps and snares. This place is most likely booby-trapped. But I have an idea. Knowing that the moose would most likely turn the opposite direction, Jack slowly walked towards that magnificent animal. It jerked its head up and snorted, sizing Jack up, but turned and sauntered off in the direction of the cabin. Well, let's follow him, Jack motioned. If there's any traps ahead, he'll find them first. Now, once the cabin was in sight, Natia scanned the trees for cameras. Silently, she pointed her fingers toward each one she could detect. Holding back in the shelter of the trees, they watched as the moose entered the clearing behind the house. As if on cue, the back door of the cabin opened and a dark-haired man appeared in the doorframe. Natia and Igor shot each other a quick glance. Nadia grabbed Jack's arm and whispered in his ear, "It's Vitya." Jack raised his eyebrows and nodded his head that he heard her. So this is the man, he thought to himself as he noted his size and his stature. Well, he's smaller than I imagined, tall but thin, wiry like a coiled spring ready to snap, Jack surmised as he watched the man standing in the door. Vitya watched as the moose, slowly made its way across that tall meadow grass behind the cabin. He pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his jacket pocket and lit one, flicking the match to the ground. He took a long drag off his cigarette and leaned his head back, exhaling a long stream of smoke. The moose turned towards him and sniffed the air, then slowly walked on, uninterested. Vitya watched the moose for a few more moments, then turned and walked back inside. Jack and the others slowly and carefully retreated back into the shadows of the forest. "I don't think Sasha's in there," Jack whispered. "I can't feel her, if that makes any sense." "I can't believe Vitya is there. He has men to do his dirty work. Why would he come here himself?" Natya whispered. "He never leaves his property. He sits in his office and he commands everyone else around him." Igor nodded. "I agree. This is not good." Jack looked at both of them and shook his head, deep in thought. "We need a plan. We need to find Sasha, but we also need to get rid of this bastard. I have to end this," Jack said desperately. "For Sasha, for you, for all of us." He thought for a moment. "We can't get to that cabin without being seen on camera. I could go as a wolf, but there's no guarantee he won't shoot me before I can get to him. I say we wait till nightfall. It won't be long now, and go under cover of darkness up to the cabin. We'll also be able to see if he leaves. I really don't think Sasha's in there. I wish I knew that for sure, but I just have to go on my gut feelings for now." Natya nodded her head in agreement. "Well, assuming that she's not in there, how are we going to deal with Vitya?" Natya asked. Jack glanced up at the sky, which was still a light shade of blue. "I guess we have time to consider those options." Miguel was angry. Not only had the Mavka taken the jewel that Sasha had buried in the yard for safety, but now she had taken the cross necklace that Rosa had given him to bargain with. He glanced all around him but saw no sign of the mysterious woman. "What do I do now?" he asked himself. As he began to make his way across that meadow, he got the distinct feeling that he was being watched. He could feel that hair on the back of his neck bristling up. He stopped, and he glanced around and he saw no one. "God, it's just my imagination," he thought as he began walking once again. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a movement. It was faint at first, almost a shimmer in the air. If he looked straight towards it, there was nothing. But if he glanced out of the corner of his eye, he could see it in his peripheral vision. He stopped and he waited, watching as that shimmering object came into focus. He closed his eyes and he breathed in deeply. And when he opened his eyes, the Mavka's ethereal form shimmered before him, her beauty both alluring and terrifying. "The jewel," he demanded. "You will return it." The Mavka's laughter was like shattering glass. "You dare bargain with me, little fox?" she asked. Miguel steeled himself. "I need the jewel. It was not a gift. My friends' lives are in danger, and we need that jewel to buy their freedom." The Mavka's form flickered, her outline blurring as if caught between two worlds. Miguel felt a chill run down his spine, his senses screaming danger. "You test my patience," the Mavka's voice echoed, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "The jewel belongs to the forest, to me." Miguel flinched but held his ground. "I can give you other things. You have already taken the cross from me. You didn't even let me give it to you." The Mavka laughed. Suddenly, she stood inches from his face, her breath like winter frost. She ran her fingers through his hair and down his neck. "You come into my forest, bringing me gifts, and now you want me to return them to you?" "Just the jewel," Miguel pleaded. "Please. It's very important that it gets returned to its original owner. I'll do anything you ask in return." The Mavka began unbuttoning Miguel's shirt. "There is one thing you can give me, little fox, And if you give me that one thing, I will return the jewel to you. Anything, Miguel answered, his breath becoming labored as the mavka stroked his skin. You can give me a child. Your child. The crunch of gravel under tires broke the silence as Carl's truck pulled up to the imposing log house. Carl cut the engine, and Sasha's piercing blue eyes scanned the property, a knot of worry tightening in her chest. Jack's truck's not here, she murmured as she opened the door and stepped onto the gravel. Carl followed, his weathered face etched with concern. I'm sure he's still out looking for you. The side door to the kitchen opened and Juanita came rushing out, followed by Julian, Grizzly, and Rosa. Sasha, Juanita exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her. Thank God you're safe, but who's this? She eyed Carl warily. Sasha felt the weight of their questioning gazes. This is Carl, she began carefully, choosing her words. He helped me. But where are the others? What's happened? Julian's brow furrowed. Jack took Natia and Igor to find you. They left hours ago, heading for the safe house in Fairbanks, where they store those Russian communication gadgets. They thought you might have been taken there. A chill ran down Sasha's spine. She turned to Carl, eyes pleading. I have to go after them. Carl nodded grimly. I'll drive. But let's go in and make some coffee to take with us. It's going to be another long drive back to Fairbanks. Grizzly greeted Carl like they were old friends, which eased the tension. Juanita, however, eyed Carl suspiciously. As they moved towards the door, Juanita wrapped her arm in Sasha's and whispered to her, Sasha, what's really going on? Who's this guy? And why do you trust him? We thought you'd been kidnapped. Were you with this man the whole time? No, it's not what you think, I promise. And I'll explain everything, she said softly. But right now, we need to find Jack. Juanita and Julian climbed into the back seat of the King cab, while Sasha and Carl sat up front. Grizzly assured them that he and Rosa would be just fine, and besides, someone needed to keep an eye out for Miguel. He reached his arm in and touched Sasha's shoulder. I'm glad you're okay, Grizzly said in his low, gruff voice. But I'll be damn glad when all this nonsense comes to an end. I don't think my old heart can take any more excitement. Now you be careful. The engine roared to life as they peeled away from the house. Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that Jack was in serious danger. Nightfall had arrived. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant howl of wind. Natia and Igor exchanged a brief glance, then branched off into opposite directions to circle the house. Jack, already transformed into his wolf form, crept low through the yard. His dark fur blended into the black of the night. He padded silently towards the back of the cabin. Avitya noticed him on camera. He would be less likely to shoot him in the dark, and it might just distract him enough to allow Natia and Igor an opportunity to move in closer without being seen. Inside the small cabin, Vitya was pacing the floor. He was not a man of patience, and being holed up in this cabin for an entire afternoon had put him on edge. He didn't know where to begin looking for Sasha in this country. He was unfamiliar with it. And now there was no sign of Vern either. He'd been making calls all day to his various contacts. Now, if he was back in Russia, he'd have a whole army at his disposal. But here, in Alaska, he had to rely on the few eyes and ears that were scattered throughout the area. Fairbanks had a fairly large Russian population, as did most of Alaska. And no matter how long they'd been living in the States, most still had memories of what happens when you don't come when called. All it took was one phone call from Vitya to instill fear and ensure their cooperation. If Vern was anywhere in the area, Vitya would soon know. A slight movement in one of the cameras caught his eye as he paced back and forth across the small room with the monitors. Vitya stopped and peered into the screen. Just a wandering dog, he thought, or a coyote perhaps. He turned away from the screen, dismissing the blur off in the distance. Outside, Jack was coming around the side of the house, checking the windows for movement, his senses on high alert. He pressed his body low to the ground, every muscle tense as he neared the cabin. Twice, Jack saw that man move across the window, pacing. Jack continued to circle the house as Natya stalked closer, running from tree cover to the back of the cabin. Vitya stopped, turned, and peered closely into one of the monitors. Through the window, Jack could see him quickly tucking a gun into his belt and grabbing another from the table near the sofa. Jack leapt past Natya to the door, ready to tangle with the man as soon as he came through. Natya ducked behind a low-lying bush as Igor ran from his cover towards the cabin. Suddenly, the door burst open and Vitya began firing shots into the darkness. The scene erupted in chaos as Vitya stepped off the small porch just as Jack leapt upon him with eyes blazing and muscles coiled. Man and wolf collided in a flurry of fists and snarls. Jack felt a rib crack under Vitya's powerful blow, but adrenaline dulled the pain. He tore at Vitya's arm and tasted blood mixed with fabric. Vitya staggered and raised his gun to shoot. A bullet from Natya's gun pierced Vitya's shoulder, and he whirled around to face her as Jack bit into his left leg. Igor came around the other side of the cabin and fired, hitting Vitya in the left side and barely missing Jack's ear. But it was not quick enough to stop Vitya's bullet from grazing Nadia's head. She fell to the ground, blood pouring down her face. Igor fired again just as Vitya whirled around to face Jack once again. But the bullet didn't connect with its target. Suddenly, a blur of white came from the darkness and lunged at Vitya with terrifying precision. Jack blinked in disbelief as a massive wolf, its white fur gleaming like fresh snow, clamped its powerful jaws around Vitya's throat. There was a sickening crunch, and then silence. Jack stumbled back, witnessing the wolf that was much larger than himself tear into Vitya's flesh. The wolf turned, its intelligent eyes meeting Jack's for a brief moment before it turned and bounded back into the forest. The silence that fell over the clearing around the cabin was deafening. Jack crouched by the limp and lifeless body of Vitya. Natya lay on the ground, her hand pressed to her bleeding head as she struggled to sit up. "Natya!" Igor cried out, running to her side. "I'm fine," she gasped. "He only grazed me." Igor helped her to her feet and guided her inside, sitting her down on the sofa and grabbing a wet towel to wash away the blood and check the wound. Jack bounded inside and nuzzled his nose in Natya's hand for a moment before leaving. Jack had left his clothes at the truck. It took him only a few minutes to run there and transform back into his human body. He drove the truck back to the cabin and helped Igor drag Vitya's body onto a blanket. Together, they hefted him into the back of the pickup and helped Natya inside. After locking up the cabin, Jack drove away, leaving the rental car parked outside. Jack glanced over at Nadia. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah, the bleeding's already stopped. I was lucky." "What are you going to do with him?" She turned her head toward the back of the pickup, where Vitya's body lay under blankets. "We'll put him up there where we put the other bodies. I don't know what we're going to do with the rental car, though. We'll figure that out in the morning. Right now, I want to get you back to the house so we can get that wound looked at. And then we need to find Sasha." "Where did that enormous white wolf come from?" Igor asked. Jack just shook his head. "That's the second time we've had help from that wolf, and yet I have no idea who it is." As the truck rumbled down the dirt road towards the highway, the forest seemed to close in on him. Natya sat in silence, her fingers absently tracing the bandage Igor had placed on her head. The shock of the attack still echoed in her thoughts. The fact that Vitya was now dead was difficult to comprehend, but her thoughts kept circling back to the wolf. As the truck slowed down and made its turn onto the highway for home, a white wolf stood at the edge of the tree line and silently watched.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope we'll see you all here next week for the next installment of the Wolfman Chronicles. Have a great week, everyone.